We're recording this episode of Foreign Policy on December 24th, just a few hours before Christmas Eve. Grinches that we are, we thought this was an appropriate time to talk about the oppression and persecution of Christians. In Nigeria, Christian communities are facing what President Trump has called an existential threat from groups that proclaim they are waging jihad, slaughtering Christians in their homes and on their farms, abducting Christian children, burning down churches. In the Middle East, where Christianity was born, Christian communities are being driven out. I'll remind you that Israel, the only state in the Middle East that does not have a Muslim ruler, is the singular exception. Wars against Christians are also being waged in Pakistan, Eritrea, and North Korea. Today we're going to talk about what's happening in China, which of course is ruled with an iron fist by the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. Joining us is Jin Drexel, the daughter of Zion Church founder Ezra Jin. On October 10th, the CCP arrested Pastor Ezra Jin, along with 20 other Zion Church leaders, the most massive crackdown on a Christian church in China in decades. Grace is currently a national security analyst in the U.S. Senate. She was previously a professional staff member at the Congressional Executive Commission on China, tasked with documenting human rights abuses in China, of which there has never been a shortage. Grace also is an FDD National Security Fellow. That's an educational program FDD runs for young national security leaders. I'm Cliff May, and I'm pleased you're joining us too here on Foreign Policy. Well, welcome, Grace. I have to start by saying how sorry I am that this cannot be a Merry Christmas for you and your family.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for taking this time to talk to me in this hours before Christmas. And thank you for your family for understanding and letting you be doing this with me. Yes, I think it will be a kind of a weird Christmas for all of us. The church will still be hosting a Christmas service, and we hope that everyone in Zion Church will be safe as the crackdown continues. But like you said, my father, along with 17 others, are currently in detention center, and they will not be able to celebrate Christmas with their families or even at all. And they will instead be forced to memorize Xi Jinping thought and just pretend that this was just another day in the calendar year.
You know what? I want you to tell us so people understand about yourself and about your family. I mean, it's quite a story. You were actually born in Beijing, right?
Yes, correct. We're actually a Korean minority group in China. So he was born and raised along a couple of villages away from my mother, actually. So they've known each other for a very long time since they were in middle school, high school together. They were both in the Korean schools up in the northern parts of China. And just very, very, my dad would say that he was extremely lucky and was able to do very well on his college entry exam and got into one of the best universities of China, the Beijing University in Beijing. And that was like really, truly kind of like rags to, not riches, but rags to like talent, I suppose, type of a big shift for him. So he left his little village and came to Beijing and started school in Beijing University. In his third year of university, that just so happened to be also the year of 1989, where the students were protesting.
Tiananmen Square we're talking about, just so people understand, yeah.
Yes, the Tiananmen Square protest that subsequently ended in a pretty brutal crackdown from the Chinese government on these extremely, I think they were very dreamy college students who wanted the best for their country. And so many of them, my dad would say, never came back. He didn't know what happened to them after that summer.
Some people listening may not remember, may not have read this history. There was these are people protesting for basic freedom, for some democracy, for some loosening up of Communist Party rule. And there was a massacre. And it could have been hundreds, some would say thousands, who were actually killed. And one thing you said, because I didn't know, I'm going to digress just for a second. I didn't realize you were from a Korean minority there. Was there prejudice against the Korean minority? Because my understanding is that China is the Chinese Communist Party is dominated by the ethnicity called Han Chinese, and that some groups, I would say the Tibetans, I would say the Uyghurs, East Turkestan, are very severely oppressed. What's the situation for Koreans of Chinese citizenship?
I think obviously, like there are different ethnicities in China, but they are a very small percentage. It's very different than in America, let's say, where you have kind of a more like a bigger percentage of each race, etc. In China, I think around like 92% at least are all Han, and the rest of the minorities are kind of within this 10% group. So the Korean minority is also extremely a small group of like folks. Um, and for each group, it's a little bit different of how Chinese government would kind of like target or try to influence or like control these groups. Um, Ultimately, there were definitely discrimination. Like there are some things that like what my father and some other people would say, like you were just not allowed to study in the university. Like you're not allowed to study um, like like you can't be a pilot, Air Force pilot. That was just not allowed. For example, at that time, I'm not really sure about the policies at this point and how there could be discrimination. But like I think in terms of the Uyghurs and the Tibetans, because they are also a slightly bigger group with more predominant like land-based area. For the Koreans, because we're such a small minority, we are grouped in a like close to the northern borders of China, like um, east. But I think we don't really pose a territorial threat because of our percentage. Um, so in general, um, they are less threatened by the Korean minority, I would say. But we still hear about cases recently of how they've been shutting down or being more or making the Korean schools teach Chinese more than they teach Korean, etc. Just like they've done in the Tibetan schools and the Uyghur schools and the Mongolian schools, etc.
Your father and mother, do you speak Korean as well as Mandarin?
We do. I definitely am not as good in Korean as the other languages, but I can watch K-drama without subtitles, so that's all I need it for
It's
right
very
now.
very impressive.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, so let's get back to your father. So your father is Beijing University. That's a fast track to success, I would say, as long as you're a good communist,
Yeah.
right? And then what happens instead of becoming a communist, he kind of decides, you know what, I think I'm a Christian. How does that go? How does that evolve?
Yeah, yeah. I think again, like if you step into their perspective, like my dad had like and many people of his generation were in some ways extremely like loyal and thankful to the state. Like they came from nothing and the state paid for their whole college. Their life was set. Like they were going to get a good job and they were going to be taken care of, quote unquote, by the state. So in some way they were naive and they were like they thought that they could expect to be the leaders of their countries and they can demand things of their country because they were going to be the future leaders, etc. But when the crush when the government came and really betrayed their trust in such a way and crushed the people, like their whole identity. Yeah, during the Tiananmen Square, like their whole identity, everything that they built their entire worldview on just came crashing down. There was nothing in which they felt like their life became meaningless.
So what did your father do after Tiananmen Square? What direction did he take then?
Yeah, yeah. So he said that at that time there were some local like church elderly, like women, especially they were also Korean ethnic minority, and they would invite him initially for like Korean food, just like many churches in the US does for international students. They invite them for like Chinese food or like other food to like entice these young kids to come to church. So similarly, they invited my dad for warm like Korean food and these type of cultural like familial events. But after the Tiananmen massacre, he attended a funeral, and he talks about this funeral quite often in his sermons as well. Like he said that there was so much joy and hope in these people, even in death and even as they are elderly. And yet he, as a 20-year-old, had no hope, had no perspective of the world. Like he didn't know what he was living for. He didn't know what he was going to die for. Um, and this joy and this love and this peace from these Christian elderly people who he kind of looked down on initially because he thought he was smarter and wiser and like he was the future and such. Um, and that joy, peace, and love really drew him to the church. And eventually he just did everything he can to learn more about it, and started from like washing the toilets to like eventually, because he was one of the few young Christians there, they asked him to go up in the front and just preach. And he would study in the library about anything he can get his hand on about Christianity. Um, and he would apparently not preach very well in the beginning, but he then just learned a lot through just a lot of trial and error and um, a lot of opportunity because they were so gentle and patient with him as well.
But this was not the Zion Church. This was a different church.
No.
Three self-patriotic movement. Explain what the heck that is.
Correct. That is a government authorized church. Technically, we say that Zion Church is not registered, but if you look at it, none of these churches are actually registered. Even the three self churches are not registered. They are controlled under the three self patriotic church movement and the Chinese Christian Council. There are like several things that are like kind of party organizations, and those are the only groups that are registered. But anyway, so my dad because he came to Christ in a state church through these older ladies, he just felt like he should serve in the place that he became a Christian. So he didn't think much about it. He didn't know what the difference were even. And so he started serving in a state church. He became ordained as an official minister in the Chinese Communist Party Oregon Church. And that was also a shock for most people at that generation because there was no one who was college graduated even, and not to say the best university of China graduated who became a pastor. Like the pay was bad. No one knew even what a pastor was, not to say like it's not a prestigious thing. When I went to school, people would ask me what my dad does, and I would say a pastor, and they're like, "What's that?" Like, so, so in general, like, he started and became a church leader in this state-controlled government church, but he served for almost a decade, and within that time, he truly understood that the state church was controlled in all aspects by the government, and then later on now especially controlled by the party, who has very different understanding of what they perceive as the goal of religion. So in every single decision in which church leaders everywhere thinks it's sacred decisions of religion, like who gets to be baptized, what sermons to preach on Sunday, what songs of worship to sing, who becomes a pastor, and what kind of small groups you host. Like all of these things are church decisions, are spiritual decisions. And yet, those are the things that the Chinese Communist Party and the government tries to control.
So he begins, if I'm understanding correctly, to get to question whether the church should be under the the thumb of the Communist Party. And is that when he decides maybe I can go abroad and study and do ministerial study and manage to get to take the family to California? Do I have that right?
Yeah, exactly. So, he left. So he felt like it was like serving two masters in the Christian term. Like it was not having God and serving God first and foremost. It was serving the party, and God was under the party. So he felt like it was a church that was captive. Not to say there aren't good Christians, like individuals there, but the structure itself is one that is not glorifying to God. So he left, and like you said, he was able to get a scholarship to go to Fuller Seminary, and he did a doctorate of ministry there.
That's in California, Southern California.
That's in California, in Pasadena.
And how old were you when you got there?
I was 7 or 8
Oh,
around then.
okay.
I was in 3rd grade. I was going into 3rd grade. So it was such
Yeah.
a very different world. Especially in which, again, like I said, the Communist Party school, I went to a public school in China. Most of my friends didn't know what a pastor was. Most of my teachers saw me as the enemy of the state, or the remnant of the enemy of the state. Um, and and I had friends in China, but I always felt like I was the other in some ways. And when I came to the U.S., like people were very like respectful towards my father's job. I was shocked. I never like felt that my father's job was respected. Um, and there was just like people go to church and it was not a big deal. They say like God bless you on the street, and like even our like Pledge of Allegiance had like God in there in the like statement. It was just such a different world. um and yeah, like um it was a very different type of, as a young kid, like I think that was also a time in which I got to hang out a lot with my family, and had a very just a very like normal, a very warm childhood. um but after a couple of years, um my father had finished his studies, and he actually potentially had the opportunity to stay in the US to minister at a church. But some folks in China reached out to him and said that he was needed in China. And the decision then between my mom and my dad, um, and me, we had, especially my dad felt like he was called to serve in the Chinese church. So for me and my mom, we came back a little bit earlier than my dad. He had to finish up a little bit more of his schooling, and my parents wanted me to start middle school in China, instead of coming in halfway. So we all moved back to China. And in 2007, my dad started Zion Church. And it was initially just a very small group of people. He knew that he could not go back to the state church. And so in some ways, this was the only available option for him.
So initially, and this was in other words, this was going to be an unregistered church, a church that wouldn't say, "Okay, we understand we need to be under the auspices of the Chinese Communist Party to tell us what our sermons should be, what we can teach to discourage theism." He decided, "I'm going to try to not do that," and he was kind of testing the limits of the party's tolerance because the CCP. You correct me if I'm wrong, at various times has been very intolerant, the Cultural Revolution long before your time, but people should know what that is. Maybe we'll come back to it. And there have been times when it's cracked down, like more recently, and we'll talk about that too.
Yeah.
Am I understanding that correctly too,
Yes,
please?
yes, exactly, totally. And like you said, like around the early 2000s, which is when we went back, or like mid 2000s, I suppose. But around the early 2000s, there was a movement generally the society was opening up. And so there were lots of like businesses, there were lots of NGOs, the whole society was more tolerant in general. Um, and um, and that was a different time, and meant there was also a movement within the church the unregistered or underground or house church, there are many names for kind of similar things, that also said that we should no longer be in hiding and we want to also be a witness to the society. So it didn't start with my father's church. There were many churches before my father who were already in this opening up phase, and many of them moved into like office buildings and rented out spaces that became public. And so that became like the house. That was the general urban house church movement. It was kind of the general term of it, in which many churches are no longer in the villages, are no longer in hiding, are no longer secret. They were mostly the more vibrant churches happened to be in the cities. They were open. They were full of like young intellectuals. And so my father started Zion Church in some ways, joining that type of a wave. And so he started Zion Church in like as not a church in hiding. And he also felt like he could not hide, since he was it was a government ordained pastor. They know where he is and they would ask him like, what are you doing? So there was impossible for him to hide in the first place. So he started Zion Church in this like as part of this more like vibrant urban church movement.
Around 2016, that's when the Chinese government decided, okay, enough of this. We're not going to allow this kind of freedom anymore. We're going to crack down. And they launched, I think, what you called a Sionization, like Sinoization campaign to tighten controls by the Chinese Communist Party particularly on Christians. Probably not just. Do I have that right?
Yes, correct. So in 2016, I believe they released a new like edits to the regulation on religion, which was kind of how all religions were regulated in China. And that was, I think, the first time this like Sinicization of religion term came into focus. And it wasn't just targeted on Christians, it was targeted on all religion. Well, in China, they only recognize 5 religions, but in general, it just meant everything else had even less space to operate. But the 5 religion that China recognizes is Taoism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, and Catholicism. So they separate Christianity and Catholicism as part of their 5 recognized religions. But in every religion, they would have different ways. Some are kind of bleeds into another, some are similar, of kind of control, and they call that type of control Sinicization. So you see in the Uyghur case, there was a lot of tearing down mosques and rebuilding some that looked more Chinese, and in general, like just like making, like kind of forcing people to like not go into the mosque, etc. For Tibetans, it was also similar. For the Christians, like around 2017, 2018 was when we saw this big wave of them also attacking the Christian churches as well, where they tore down historic buildings and made them also look more Chinese. But also they tore down crosses. They took away like portraits of like any symbols or portraits of like Jesus, Mary, like cross and things like that. And they put in many of these churches, portraits of Mao and Xi Jinping. And those were churches actually part of the government registered churches, because those are actually the churches that had like buildings and had crosses, etc. But for the unregistered churches, their way of Sinicizing religion was just to destroy and to to control and to destroy, basically. So unless you joined us, then you will be destroyed. You will be we will take you like out. So many underground churches at that point were raided, were harassed, many of them shut down, etc., including in 2018 was the first time in which they tried to shut down Zion Church, and they took away the building that we had in Beijing. It was a pretty public building, but they shut down the building. They took away all our church assets. But there was also another church, Early Rain Covenant Church, similarly, also a very public church. They were also dismantled. Their pastor was then sentenced to 9 years in prison. Pastor Wang Yi is still serving out his sentence today.
Well, what crime did they charge him with?
Yeah, at that time, I think he was charged with state subversion. Um, yeah. And then since then, they've also come up with other charges such as fraud or illegal business operations, etc.
Superstition, if I remember, is one of them, right?
Yes, and superstition. And then for the fraud, for the crime of fraud and illegal business operation, it's also a very interesting case because it sounds really technical and it sounds very like, oh, like that could potentially be a crime. But the way that they phrase it is that you go around claiming to be a pastor and collecting tithe, but we didn't see you as a pastor. We didn't recognize you as a pastor. So you're actually a fraudster. So again, it's this way of twisting what historically churches have never been required to do this in order to choose their own leaders and to operate their own church. But they're coding what they're doing and they're coding their persecution under this legal language and then still persecuting church leaders.
And so your father's church was shut down, the assets were seized, the building was closed down, but he decided at that point not to go back to the U.S. So did he send you back, you and the family back to the U.S. at that point?
Yeah. So in 2018, when they shut down, there was a building up to the ultimate shutdown in September. So around February, March, there was already a lot of harassment towards our congregation. They installed facial recognition cameras in the lobby of our church, so they found out who our congregations were.
How big a congregation was this, just so I know?
We had around 1,500 people. So again, by American standards, still a very small church.
Especially in a country that has a population.
Yeah.
Does anybody have an estimate how many believing Christians? I don't know if anybody knows that. Is there an estimate of the number or the percentage? Is it very?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to know. So I probably will not be the best person to answer that question.
I don't know how you know. You can't poll, you can't ask. It's not based on attendance.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I thought I'd ask. Okay, so your father decided he's going to send the family away. He's going to stay. He's going to do the church more underground, like on the internet, and he's going to do it any way he can and see if he can't hold the congregation together in some way. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So initially, the church had asked our whole family to leave China,
Oh, wow.
in order to see if the pressure will die down. Because there was just so much pressure building up to Zion Church, they felt like maybe if the senior pastor wasn't there, maybe the church and the government can each feel like there's some breather space and everyone can cool down a little bit. But so my father was with us initially in June of 2019. But when he came to the US and after a month, he realized that the pressure was still building and they weren't cooling down. He decided to go back to China. And that was when my brothers and my mom, my brothers were extremely young at that time. They were in elementary school and middle school. With the one child policy, we had quite an age gap.
Oh, yeah, too. There were three
Yeah,
children, right? Yes, you didn't.
yeah, yeah. So they were born in the U.S. During the time that my dad did his doctorate. So they stayed in the U.S. And my dad went back to China. I later on visited him, and that's kind of another story. But generally speaking, he went back to China and then the church was shut down. After the church was shut down, the government really cracked down, continued to crack down on Zion Church. And there was no office building anywhere in China, in Beijing, that would lend its space to Zion Church members. And so, in the desperation where there was no space for us to meet, my dad started this online church model, but it was like a hybrid church from the beginning. So he would record things and then he would ask people then to listen to his sermons and his worship together. But it no longer had this like barrier of like the demand for the location to be a certain way. So you didn't need a place where you had 20 seats or 50 seats and then a podium, a sound system, etc. You couldn't do it in a cafe or wearing headphones, and then no one knew what you were doing for an hour. You're just probably looking like another Gen Zer, and or you can just go. Even at a park, you can walk around the park doing service, and then afterwards, you can have fellowship after. Some church members became really creative and they like rented out a tour bus and they were hosting their services on the tour bus. And then afterwards, like going and like hiking a mountain, etc. So it became this like very creative way to go around this like limitation of location of a congregation. So it was due to desperation. It was due to the fact that like they cornered us and they thought that we would not be able to meet unless we had a location. But that happened around 2019, and we didn't expect in 2020 when COVID hit China, everything shut down, and Zion Church was actually the first church that opened up our services on Zoom. And our congregants were super familiar with this way of doing service because we've been doing this for a year now, and we've fine-tuned the worship, the sermon style, etc., and how to meet and fellowship. And so we were the first church, maybe like the only church initially to host these type of Zoom churches. And then Zion Church in that wave blew up even more. And so instead of 1,500 people, we were getting like upwards of like 10,000 people. Wow. And we were meeting all across China. It was no longer just a Beijing church. It became a national church. And God really, really used even the darkest of our experience for his like glory and kingdom. And so the church grew in this way, not because we planned it, but it was quite a like unplannable miracle. Yeah.
I should mention which it's an evangelical church.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
And by the way, this is a bit of a digression too. It's really because I'm nosy. You spent some time actually studying in Israel, of all places.
Yes, I did. So after college, I thought I wanted to go to law school, but I wasn't completely sure. And I did a tour in Israel with my church, and I fell in love with the place. And I was just trying to figure out like how can I stay here longer? And the easiest way to stay there longer is to do a program there. So I looked up and I found a really good program at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. In their law school, they had a human rights and transitional justice master's program. And so I thought like everything is clicking. So I applied pretty last minute and surprisingly got in. And also they were very generous and also gave me some scholarship. And so I felt like it was also a way to see if I did in fact want to go to law school, etc. And it was probably one of the best, like, it was really wonderful to be able to be in Jerusalem for like a year and a half during the studies. Yeah.
Jerusalem it's a holy city. It's a holy city for Christians as much as Jews and for Muslims too. And one should, that should be recognized that three religions have important ties to that city.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah, and at the time, especially, I was always curious about like religion and state relations, etc. as well. So learning a little bit about, like you said, how do different religion groups live together and coexist and such was also a very interesting topic that I wanted to like learn more about. So it was just a fascinating place.
So your father is now in detention. Do we know what his life is like in detention? Do we have any you have any sense of that, how bad it is?
Yeah. So the church was operating in this way until October of this year, like you mentioned, in which the church was again under this attack, and they rounded up all the church members from across 11 cities from all across China. So that's why it was like definitely the most widespread attack on the
This
church.
gets back to saying since the Cultural Revolution, probably.
Yes, yes.
Just give 30 seconds on what the Cultural Revolution was for somebody who's young and doesn't know, an American who may not know. They should know that. Anybody listening, they should know, but they may not. Just give a very quick.
Sure, sure. Well, the Cultural Revolution was mostly a period of time where there was this mayhem created by Mao Zedong, who was the chairman of China at the time, and he utilized the people's like just like obsession with him, and created this kind of upside down um, society in which many people were um, like harassing the elderly, harassing the educated, harassing the landlords, and all of these things. And then, so there was a lot of people who were publicly humiliated, many people who were killed, etc. And one of the things that were kind of seen as the enemy of the state was religion. And so Christianity, many people who were Christians, as well as like other things like being a Confucian scholar and all of these such like various things that Mao said that were like remnants of the past, etc., were punished and attacked. So famously during the Cultural Revolution, the wife and later a widow of Mao said that there were no Christians in China, and that's kind of what one of the quotes that she was mostly known for.
Right. Right. Okay. And so you've got a human rights lawyer in China trying to work in his case. I'm actually surprised that you can be a human rights lawyer in China and not find yourself in detention.
They are certainly extremely brave people, and they've also suffered a lot for their advocacy, and we are praying for them just as much because we know that what this means is that there is potentially a target on their back as well, and many of them are coming into this case also knowing that that is a potential. So there's tremendous pressure and stress on these lawyers as well. A couple of years ago there was a crackdown on these human rights lawyers. So yeah, we hope that um, yeah, we are really thankful for their courage and we hope all the best for them as well.
I also want to mention, I'm sure you know something about this, the case of Jimmy Lai.
Mhm, mhm.
He is a Christian. He is a vocal advocate of free markets. He has a British citizenship, so he could have gotten out of the country. He said he was the publisher of Apple Daily, the most popular newspaper in Hong Kong. He is a great entrepreneur who made huge amount. I mean, he's like a billionaire. So he could have gotten it, but he was so dedicated to freedom, he still is, in certainly in Hong Kong, in China more broadly, that he refused to leave. He's 78 years old. He was in solitary confinement. I think about a week ago, he was found guilty under national security law of some crazy thing like support. I mean, he did nothing wrong whatsoever. Um, and I think people should be doing more. For example, he is a British citizen, and he's loyal to Hong Kong because even as a British colony, Hong Kong had rights and freedoms that the people in the mainland didn't have. Right now, the Communist Party is trying to open the biggest embassy in the world in London. I would say that Prime Minister Keir Starmer should say no. No. First of all, you violated the treaty we had with you on Hong Kong. That treaty said the Hong Kong citizens were going to retain their rights for 50 years. Xi Jinping took that away, and there were really no repercussions for that. That's wrong. And he didn't have to do that. And he could have been saying to Taiwan, look, your life will be like those in Hong Kong. We understand you have a different culture after all these years. Your freedoms. But he didn't. He wanted to show he could do it. So I think Keir Starmer is very wrong not to say I think you should say until we see certainly Jimmy Lai freed, you're not getting this permission. I don't think it should be anyhow. It's going to be a den of espionage, I think, in for Britain and for Europe. Anyhow, you don't need to comment on that unless you want to, but this is something I've been following for a long time. We had Jimmy Lai into FDD years and years
Oh,
ago.
wow.
Yeah, we did, and he
Wow.
was very articulate on all this.
Yeah, yeah. Jimmy Lai is truly, I also personally think he is such a hero and such an amazing, amazing, like individual. So I think personally, I feel extremely, like even bewildered by how this is happening in Hong Kong. And like you said, this really does showcase how Hong Kong is becoming less and less free and becoming more and more like just like China. And just like you said, like if China wants to be seen as a normal country and a powerhouse in this global world, it is not to just be afraid of a pastor, be afraid of one man who writes, who has a publishing office. Like that is not how you show the world that you are a normal country, that you are a powerful country. This large, big embassy is kind of and like I agree, it's ridiculous to give such a in a way like honor to a country that is not acting and behaving like a responsible nation right now. So it is very
Is the
unfortunate.
U.S. government supporting you in any way, either in Congress or the Trump administration? Are you getting any support?
Yeah, yeah. I definitely, as an American citizen, as you mentioned, I also work in the USG. Just felt tremendous support and felt just very helpful by the people around me. Just personally, I think um, I think like many people are speaking out and asking the Chinese government about my father's case. Many people are praying and being like supporting our family personally. I think in general, I can understand it's also an extremely difficult situation. Like again, I also don't believe that the USG is God. So I don't think that like I think there is a long road ahead, and it's not just like with the snap of a finger, everything that the U.S. government demands becomes a wish.
No, it doesn't. And of course, what the position of the Chinese Communist Party and the government is, this is purely an internal affair. You have no right to say anything. I think, look, there's only so much the U.S. government can do, but I think we should be speaking out
Yes, yes, I
for our
agree.
values as well as our interests, and our values include freedom of religion, freedom of worship, freedom of the press, freedom of, I mean, that's what America stands for, and we shouldn't shy away from that, even whether we can do something about it. Don't have to go to war for that, but I also think we shouldn't be shy about it.
No, totally, totally. And I also think that there is something to be said about how the world, especially China, sees this, like you said, as a core American interest. So the less, and what core Western interest, in fact. So the less that the U.S. government, the less that the global democracy world, or those who say that, yeah, the free world in which they say that freedom of religion is a key part of what they believe in, comes and speaks out, the less they realize that the less they feel respected. China respects you less and sees you as weak. And that also projects in other ways as well.
Do you still have Chinese citizenship as well as American citizenship?
China does not allow dual
Ah, I see.
citizenship.
Okay, okay. But you've experienced what's called, and you've used this phrase, I believe, transnational repression as well, you and your
Mhm.
family, right? Just say a
Yes.
few words about that.
Yes. So I think they really came mostly for my mother and even my husband. But my mother, she was targeted, and they were especially harassing her through like calling her and presenting to like pretending to be part of an American federal agent, and then connecting to her to a Chinese like um Chinese like guard or like a policeman, and really threatened her, told her she had to come back to China or else face consequences, etc., etc. Um, and then most recently, she has seen, like she said that there was her tire got slashed inside her garage, and it was like very like bizarre because nothing else was taken or stolen, but just the tires were slashed while it was in the garage. Um, and there has been many like cyber attack type of things between me and my husband as well. So we are concerned and a little bit. It does feel like a lot to it's like a David and Goliath story in some ways, like feeling very much like the Chinese we're trying to call out something that the second most powerful country in the world does not want us to call out. Um, but yet like I have no other choice. Like my dad is in prison, so
Yes. What has UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said about this terrible situation?
the UN secretary. Oh,
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres had a big talk about the international community. I know the answer to that. He said nothing.
yes.
And the UN Human Rights Council. What is this? What's the UN Human Rights Council said about this? I know the answer to that too. They said nothing. I just want to point that out. It's not just a useless organization. It's really an evil organization at this point. It's controlled by terrible human rights abusers, and I just always like to point that out. And Gutierrez is of no value.
It's very unfortunate because they are still the only options for people like us. So it's very sad, despite knowing that it's a lost battle, it's a uphill battle or whatever. That's still the people that we try to ask help from, and we're still asking them for help. We still hope that the Human Rights Council, we still hope that Secretary General, and all the leaders of the world will speak out and be, and just like pray for my father even. We also hope that, like even Pope Leo could pray for my father.
Well, the Catholic Church is one of the registered churches. It's one of the ones that's pretty much, I mean, as I understand it, under the jackboot of the Communist Party.
Yes, with the new Sino-Vatican deal, but there are also historic underground Catholic churches as well.
Listen, you have, from me and from FDD, enormous admiration for your courage. We want to support your father and your family any way we can. We think all people of goodwill should do so. And I'm very pleased to get to know you a little better. I know you're in our National Fellowship Program, which is wonderful. I hope you're enjoying it and learning from it, but I'm glad to see you.
Thank you so much, Cliff. This was so wonderful. And thank you again for having me on Christmas Eve.
Thank you. As Merry a Christmas as you can have for you and your family, Grace. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you who have been with us for this conversation here today on Foreign Policy. Before we go, a quick word. This year on Foreign Policy, we've tracked wars erupting and expanding, the metastasizing axis of authoritarian aggressive powers moving against the West, and a rules-based U.S.-led international order under sustained assault. These aren't abstract debates. They're real, and they're shaping the world that will be inherited by the next generation. Here at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, it is our mission to confront these threats with clarity, with facts, with hard-headed analysis, and with action, without fear or favor. But that work depends on people who believe that these democratic ideals we fight for still matter. If you do, I hope you'll consider making a tax-deductible donation on our website at fdd.org/donate. fed.org, to support our work, not least for this commercial-free, listener-sponsored podcast. Thanks for listening to Foreign Policy and for standing on the side of free nations.